Good morning, everybody. I am Patrick Fitzgerald with SMLR Group. I wanted to welcome you all to the latest edition of the SMLR Coffee Hour, and wanted to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, as you come in, you are automatically muted, so don't bother trying to ask a question verbally. Please use the chat window, which you will find there's a little button at the top of your screen. You click on that, and it will drop down, and it looks like a couple of thought bubbles. Click on that and address your question to me, Patrick Fitzgerald, or host, however it comes up, and ask your question, and I'll get it to the appropriate person. And we are going to run for an hour, and we anticipate having a question and answer session pretty much, well, as it goes along, but we're going to focus on questions and answers towards the end. Again, if you have to leave and want to ask a question, go and log into our website to the registration form and fill out the questionnaire there. At this point, let's turn it over to Alan Heyman, the CEO of SMLR Group. He will act as our moderator and chief herder of cats today, and he will also introduce our panel. Without any further ado, Alan, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody. We've had such a turnout, rather surprised us last week, and this week is also way up in the double digits of attendees. We went through and looked at a lot of the questions that came up last week, and we were rather surprised. We're IT people, Roy and myself, specializing in the governance area of cybersecurity, but we received a lot of questions on insurance. So we thought it would be very interesting to invite Adam Abash, who is the senior cybersecurity insurance consultant at the Signature B&B Companies, which is part of a national organization. And one of the questions that prompted us to do this, because I think it's good we just get right into questions, was somebody said to us, I have an IT department, why do I need cyber insurance? So, Adam, let me get you started right off, and that's our question for you right off the bat.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me, Alan, and it's a pleasure to be here. And that is something that I hear a lot. I go in and I work with different organizations, and I come in and say, I have an IT department. I set up my firewalls. I set up my network security. Why do I need insurance? And I say, those are all great things. I love to hear that, and it helps to lessen your risk. And I think it's a great thing. You want to have strong IT. You want to have strong controls, but that alone isn't enough. I mean, what you want to try to do is you want to have a company-wide approach to cybersecurity, and when you're trying to prevent these breaches. But I mean, you guys are the IT experts, and I've heard repeatedly from IT teams that if somebody really wants to get in there and really wants to hack your company, they will. You can develop all of the security to prevent somebody from getting in, but eventually, if somebody's dedicating their time and their effort to getting in, they will. And it's not so much a matter of if, but a matter of when. And then, I think it leads to a false sense of security sometimes with the IT, and the risk can never be fully eliminated. And so I think that's part of the role of insurance, is to step in there and say, okay, so we did everything we could on the front end, but now we still had a loss. I mean, you can look to different examples. I mean, look at a building. You try to prevent something from happening. You try to prevent it from burning down. You do everything you can, but, things happen, and you need to be prepared for that, and that's something I think every organization should take a look at.
Adam, you bring up some very interesting points. There's a whole new sense of cybersecurity that we hear, and the purpose of our coffee hour is to convey real information. And we're finding only within the last 2 or 3 years that the need for cyber insurance has been rising very, very quickly, not to cover the cost of the breaches, but to cover the potential cost of fines that come from the state or federal government. And that's a whole new dimension when Target was breached and Sony was breached, their argument that it was an accident, it wasn't their fault, stands very well. But it was how they reacted and how they responded when the government auditors came in and looked at the absence of their paperwork, the absence of their procedures, policies, programs, training, how they handle their monitoring was at fault. And that's why the government was able to fine them. That same type of fining occurs to all levels. Roy, have you seen anything like this in the marketplace?
Adam?
Yeah.
It's Roy.
Hey, Roy.
One of the things that we do on the coffee hour, I hate to put you on the spot, but it's very important. All of a sudden we start talking about cybersecurity insurance and those types of things. Mm-hmm. Define from your industry, what do you mean by cybersecurity insurance? Is it because there's a hack, which is just a motherhood god and apple pie name? There's got to be something in a legal document that says when these things happen, then your insurance takes place. Could you define that in your world? And what is the typical policy for cybersecurity insurance, dollar-wise?
That number one. That's like 4 questions. I love it. So there's a couple. I'll tackle each part of it. Part of what I heard in there is, what are the triggers for coverage, and part of that is it varies a lot. And what we're seeing is, from carrier to carrier, the way that they're writing these policies differs greatly. It's not a standard form like a property form or a general liability form where across the board, from carrier to carrier, they'll have a few subtle differences, but overall the way they're written is fairly similar. Cyber insurance, every carrier's language is wildly different. I mean, to give you an example, you can look at a policy and they'll have something defined as a cyber incident, right? Now, a cyber incident as opposed to a privacy incident. So a cyber incident, notice they sound very similar, and a lot of people use those words interchangeably, which can lead to some confusion. So a cyber incident, you're typically referring to the failure of an organization or an insured's computer system security, right? So that's a cyber incident. A privacy incident is a failure to protect confidential information, okay? And it's a subtle difference, but it can change when the policy is triggered. Typically, if you're looking at a privacy incident, the threshold's a lot lower, right? So when you go from company to company, it's important to take into account that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach where you can write a cybersecurity with one carrier and there's one great insurance carrier that's writing the best cyber policy for every industry. It's just not the case. And you have to take into account your company specific information. And I think you led to what's the size of the organization, right? How much sensitive data do you have stored? What type of data are you storing? What's the degree of the regulatory attention that Alan mentioned, right? I mean, you shift from industry to industry. You're looking at the healthcare industry. You're talking about HIPAA. You're talking about the OCR, which which is something that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it. And I was discussing this with somebody the other day. And what's happening now is there's been a significant number of cases in the healthcare industry. And what they're trying to do now is of breaches, and I think a lot of people have seen these in the news. And so it's a HIPAA violation because of that. They have the protected health information that you're worried about. But the Office for Civil Rights is actually the one that's been taking a lot of these cases to trial and been fining people, and they're enormous losses. I'm over here in New York, and New York Presbyterian and Columbia University agreed to pay like $3.3 million from New York Pres, and Columbia University paid $1.5 million because they lost the electronic personal health information for 6,800 people. Okay? So that's a lot of people to lose information for, but just look at those numbers. 7,000 people equals almost $6 million in fines. It's staggering, some of the fines that are coming out. Now you move and you're in the financial services department. Now you have to worry about FINRA or the SEC coming down. There's lots of different regulations that you have to worry about, and they differ from industry to industry. Alan also touched on targets.
Adam, this is Alan. Getting to specifics, when does insurance kick in? Because cybersecurity attacks by malware could infect the system, but the owners of the business or the IT people don't become aware of that till maybe a year, 6 months later. Is the insurance coverage from the date that the malware initiated the attack, or the date from when the attack has been identified?
That's a great question, and I hate to have to answer you this with the classic lawyer's answer, but it depends. It depends on how the form is written and how the insurance carrier defines notification. Okay? When do you become aware of it? When do you make the carrier aware of it? All of these technicalities, I wish I could give you an across-the-board answer, but it really depends on how your coverage is written, which is why you have to be so careful when you sit down and look at these coverages, because you could go from year to year and change insurance carriers, and like you're saying, you can have something in your systems and not know about it for a year. Okay? Now, how does somebody handle that? Now, it's different if you stay with the same insurance company, obviously, for 2 years. Okay? And you look back and you have your retroactive date of the coverage, and you say, okay, it happened. They got access to our systems on this date. Right? We became aware of it at this date. Right? Now you also need to determine, was there damage? What actually happened? And part of the way that you do that is you have to do a forensic analysis. You have to figure out how these systems were breached, what information was accessed, and what the appropriate next steps are. And that's the importance of working, with a good technology firm. And you need to be able to bring somebody in who has an expertise in this. This isn't somebody you can just call, dial up somebody in a phone book and say, oh, we were breached. We need you to take a look at this. Somebody needs to go in and figure out how this happened and how to stop it. So I don't know if that got to what you were asking, but
yes. But are you saying then that cyber insurance coverage is virtually a customized type of insurance policy as you go from company to company, and one should be aware that you don't want to switch every year because of the potential, as you just described, of when an attack is identified versus when an attack started?
You know what? That's a great point, and I can tell you, in terms of all the insurance that I've worked with, cyber is unique in that you truly are developing a custom program for whatever organization you're working with, because you have to. Every company's needs and threat levels and risk appetites are different. So, that's important to me, because when I sit down, I don't come in, from a perspective of, oh, you got to go with this insurance. It's the best. You need to sit down with your client. You need to sit down with that organization and see what's really going on there. And as you mentioned, switching from carrier to carrier, right, it can pose problems. And you need to be sure that when you are signing up and when you do look at cyber insurance, you need to see how those policies contemplate, moving around, or when if they do offer a retro date. Some companies do, some companies don't. Some will just say, we're starting the coverage again on the 1st of this year, so it doesn't even make a difference if you switch companies. It's completely different from company to company, carrier to carrier. So when you're talking about developing a specialized program, that's really where I see the solution.
Do the insurance carriers do any kind of IT investigation of a client in order to see if they are at risk even before they take out coverage? How do they analyze the differences between one potential company and another one based upon the standards that are established in the industry?
That's another great question. Now, the way I would answer that is when you're taking a look at any company, any risk, right? You're going to sit down and you're going to ask them. Or this is what I do. I ask questions. I find out what's going on from the carrier's perspective, right? They want to know what this organization is doing to prevent a risk, right? So from their standpoint, I can get an application and I can sit down with a company and I can go through a cyber liability application with them, right? And we'll answer all the questions and we'll go through, okay, that's great. And then, it can go into underwriting and the carrier makes a determination on premium based on what they're doing. But what I see as important is getting a picture of that organization. What are they doing in order to reduce the risk and mitigate the risk that the insurance company is going to be covering? Because to me, if I'm an insurance company and I know that this company that I'm talking to has done a tremendous amount of work on the front end, right? They've bought into the IT. They want to make sure they have strong network security. They want to make sure there's a great risk culture in the company, right? What are you doing to engage employees in this discussion? Because a lot of the times, those are the people who inadvertently are making the mistakes. They click on something in an email. They didn't mean to shut down their entire company's systems. That's not what they tried to do. It's not necessarily malicious. But, if you have a company that's really invested in doing everything they can on the front end to mitigate and come in and put in all the IT and the framework that's necessary, insurance carriers are going to look upon that a lot more favorably.
We have a question from the audience, which I think is a natural following what our conversation is. How much does cyber insurance cost? And what are the better companies in the field?
Those are another two great questions. And I'll answer the expense question first. And I think that depends. I think it really depends on how you look at it. When you look at an expense, is the insurance company is it expensive to get an insurance policy? I mean, I don't know. What would it cost you to notify all the people affected by a breach, right? So the number that we hear a lot in the industry is it costs $200 per record, right? This is per person to notify the affected parties in a breach, right? So let's say there's 1,000 people affected. 200,000 in costs you're looking at. I don't know. Are you weighing that against an insurance policy that's going to be maybe a couple thousand? It depends. It all depends on how you look at it. What would it cost you to defend yourself in court against a liability suit? Because here's another thing. A lot of people have the misconception that this is covered by their insurance already somehow. And what the carriers have done, the carriers caught on to this very quickly. They carved out any type of cyber liability or anything relating to cyber risks from those general liability policies where a lot of people would look to for coverage. And they did that early on because they realized, these general liability coverages for, a slip and fall or bodily injury or property damage were not meant to contemplate cyber risks. They were not meant to, they didn't have that in mind when they were writing it. And so what they've done is they exclude all these cyber risks. So in the absence of a cyber policy, you're on your own in a lawsuit relating to a breach. And the final point I'll say is, in terms of expense, you have to think about your reputation in a situation like this. What does your reputation mean to you? you've developed a company or you've developed your name in whatever industry it is, whether it be healthcare, the legal field, the financial services, financial industries, retailers, right? How much money did you spend building your brand? And how quickly can all of that go away in the event of a loss? Do you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you can? I don't know if you can put a price on that, and if you can, I bet you it's pretty expensive. So when I hear that question, is it expensive? I mean, compared to the risks that you're looking at, I think right now, honestly, is a great time in the cyber insurance market. It's a time where people are looking for a solution to this, and they really need to keep that in mind. They need to understand that it's a growing risk, and the carriers are starting to contemplate it now. And I think right now is a great time to look at it because the pricing on it is very competitive too. And the second part of the question that I want to get to that you were asking about is, which insurance company has the best cyber policy? And that really changes. It depends on the industry you're in. I mentioned this before. It depends on the industry you're in. It depends on what kind of threats are you looking at. The financial industry, you have different types of information. Every company has different types of information. Healthcare providers have personalized health information, right? Retailers have credit card information, right? Financial services companies have bank account information, social security numbers. Now, you need to take into account what kind of information your company has. And from carrier to carrier, it changes. The Hartford might have a great form. I'm just giving this as an example. The Hartford might have a great form for the healthcare field, but that same form might be a disaster for a financial services company. Whereas another insurance company, Travelers, could come in and they have a great form for the financial services industry, but it might be a disaster for healthcare. You have to look at the coverage language, and I know how much everybody loves sitting down and reading coverage forms. I'm sure they love it as much as I do. And I think it's important to get in there and have the discussion to make sure that the coverage that you're buying is actually going to cover you when a loss occurs. To me, that's the most important part. Otherwise, why are you buying it?
Adam, we have a question from the audience. How much coverage is appropriate?
That's a great question. And look, once again, there's no simple answer to that. I think again, it comes down to the size of the organization. What kind of data are you storing? How much of it are you storing? Right? How many employees do you have? Because you have to keep in mind you're talking about how many employee records you have on file and also client records, right? So let's say you only have 10 employees, but you do business and you have information for 1.5 million people that are clients. You have their information, right? It's going to be a different risk than if you have a company that has a huge client. Like let's say you have a huge number of employees. Let's say you have 2,000 or 5,000 employees working for you. You don't take a lot of or 10,000 employees, let's say, and you don't have a lot of other people's information on your systems or access to it, but you have all of your employees' information, right? And there's a breach there. How are you going to deal with that? You could end up in a situation where your own employees are looking to you and saying, we gave you all this information. You had a responsibility and a duty to protect all of our information as our employer, and you failed at that. So you need to take a look at what are your risks? What are your risks really like? What kind of threats are you looking at? Are you in controversial industries where there might be state actors or cyber terrorists even looking at getting into you? Are you part of the energy industry? There's a lot of talk. I know I've heard a lot of people that are very afraid, and I think with very good reason, about the power grid and people, and the access to the power grid. If hackers get into the power grid and shutting us down, you have to look at, are there people out there that are trying specifically to get into your company? And I think that comes into it a lot too. And then the final part of it, you have to look at the company's, what's your company's own risk appetite? How much risk are you willing to take on as a company? And that's a conversation you have to have, an active discussion with the leadership of the company to decide what they want to take on.
We have seen something like this happen in the retail community, where the large retailers, sometimes even the medium-sized retailers, are determining how much coverage they want their vendors to carry, because they see that the attacks are coming in from the vendor side and it's affecting the retailer. So we've seen contracts that are being written where minimums for the vendors are $10 million, with the retailer being named as the named insured. We've started to see that also in the technology area, in the development of software and software vendors. Have you seen anything like that also?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I think, and I think the story that, the Target story that, everybody is starting to know now. And when I tell people who haven't heard the fact that the reason Target got breached, Target, this huge national retailer, got breached was because an HVAC company, a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company that did contract work in different Targets, let's say, across the country, that's how they got into Target. It was a third-party vendor, and I think when people hear that, it kind of blows their mind, and it makes you think twice about, who am I doing business with? What are my vendors doing to protect me? And these hackers aren't necessarily trying to go into a specific company. What they're trying to do a lot of time is they're opportunistic. They're looking for the weakest point in. And to them, if that's a third-party vendor, if that's a mom-and-pop shop that, maybe doesn't have an IT team, maybe doesn't have the resources to prepare a great defense against all these hacks, maybe they don't have that. And I think a lot more companies are taking a lot closer look at the third-party vendors and the people that they're doing business with to make sure that they're protected.
We have another question from the audience. Cyber governance and compliance, does automatically make you compliant when you have those forms in place? What's been your experience on that, Roy?
Roy?
We lose you, Roy. Did we lose you?
No, he's lost. There he is.
No, I'm here. Alan, you have
Roy,
probably
I'm
spent
sorry.
more...
I bored him to death with insurance. I'm sorry, Roy.
I thought I heard snoring.
No.
It happened live on air.
Alan, I would answer that, but you have probably spent more time for us, both as a company and as the people, in that area. I know I've gone off and worked in the areas of third-party vendors within technology and a lot of other areas, but it really should be you that addresses the compliance, the audit, the governance part of that thing. I don't think people realize that everything with cybersecurity is not technology. It is an entire corporation. It is a family. It has a life of its own, and that is the governance part of that. So I'm going to push the question right back to you.
I'll remember that, Roy. A simple answer is no. There's 47 state laws that are in place. There are federal laws. There's FTC. There's the Consumer Protection Board, the OCR, HIPAA, FINRA, SEC, even the National Labor Relations Board, which traditionally will only deal with union employees, now will protect all employees. It's very complicated. It's very difficult in order to make one. This is not something you can buy off the shelf and you're automatically covered. And then once you have a document in place, the question becomes, do you follow the document as a company? And I think one of the factors that I saw another question come across, it seems as if we're constantly talking about the big guys, the Targets and the Sonys. And one person said, I'm a little guy. I'm an accounting firm with 4 people. Do all these things apply to me? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. The compliance, all the aspects of these requirements fall upon an individual company as much as they do on a larger company. And all the considerations for a small company are in place. The magnitude and the cost factors are not the same. But this goes back to a report that I saw a number of years ago from IBM that said in the future, the biggest risk that a company is going to have, a small company specifically, was not the malware, but the potential fines that will be coming from the federal and state governments based upon adherence to the rules and regulations and compliance. That's where everything is moving in this direction. So you really have to look at this, and you got to investigate it and to see what you need and what's involved based upon your size and which state you're working with, or whether it's a number of states. So, unfortunately, it's not a yes or no answer.
Alan, I think that's a great point. What you were saying about the state agencies, you have to also keep in mind, just from a conceptual standpoint, right? When they have these breaches, right, a lot of these different offices that are handling, the Office for Civil Rights, or, the state's Attorney General, a lot of these cyber laws fall to the states because there's no uniform federal law. So these states' Attorney General, if they can go after a company and generate revenue that way in fines, and say, and also, by the way, look like the good guy, look like the hero, and say, hey, these people weren't protecting you, but I'm your state's Attorney General, and I went after them, and I made sure that they're protecting your information. And by the way, we hit them with a $10 million fine. I think that there's a lot of motivation on that side as well. Not passing judgment on it. It makes sense to me. I understand where you're coming from with that.
But Alan, okay, I'm not going to stay out of it after all. I'm going to take the people that are listening to this with us right now and weigh in on their side. Yesterday, I had a discussion with a CTO from a very large airline organization, and he was bitter. And he said, we do everything we can because cybersecurity is always blamed on technology. It is a technology problem. It is a technology problem. It is a technology problem. And we can do all we can do. And now you're going to come in here and introduce to me the governance side of everything, the compliance side of everything, and nobody can give me a clear answer as to what do I have to do. He threw it right back at me yesterday and said, so how do I know if I'm in compliance with a NIST environment? How do I know what's coming down in those areas? Because no one inside our corporation except my organization is doing anything in these places. So it is just from his own words, a quote from his own words. It's a mess. And it is not an IT problem standalone. We are doing all we can to take care of that. Yes, I will accept part of the responsibility on third-party vendors, but we don't interface with a lot of those. Everyone thinks a third-party vendor has to be a firewall, some kind of a security thing along that line. That's not true. You just said what caused target on those areas. So what has to happen more quickly is bringing the entire corporation up and make it aware from top to bottom of what really entails cybersecurity, and that's where people need to pull their head out of the sand and go look at the other side. Don't throw the transom and all of the stuff over to IT. They're doing about all they can do. Now that's my background, but at the same time, that's where the finger points. That's the people that get fired first. That's where all the problem's at. And so when you go talk to a board of director member or another C-level person, I'll pick on a CFO. They will say, That's all handled in IT security, and IT security is closing the door on that position. So we have to help the people that are listening in the audience right now understand, turn away from the IT areas and begin to learn. I mean, we say compliance so easy. It makes it so, and everybody goes, compliant. What do you mean by compliance? We don't even know the word. We got auditors, but we don't know if we're in compliance of this or compliance of that. So it is a much bigger problem that needs to be addressed all in a single package. It has to.
There's also, Roy, there's also another side. I always think it's very important to learn from your clients. And I was dealing with a CFO from a medium-sized company, and we had a conversation, and he said he looked upon the solution of cybersecurity as a way to bring together for a common problem all the departments that he was responsible for, whether it was HR, IT, even marketing, even the people who were doing the social media websites. And he started to realize that cybersecurity was the answer that he was looking for to really make his entire organization function together. And he started talking about cybersecurity as embedding it into the fabric of the company so that it was not something outside, but every department, every person within the department was aware of it, had concerns, and understand what it meant across the entire aspect of the company.
Yeah, but in all fairness, if we were to give a ratio, and it would be a hypothetical number for me, 1 out of 100 is aware that that has to be done. It still
Correct.
boils back
Correct.
down. It still boils back down to we've spent a lot of time with a lot of companies in a lot of different vertical space of different size, and most of them turn their attention towards, thank you very much, this sounds really good, I'm going to turn it over to the IT department. There is a client that said that took control of a platform that we support. And it was interesting because he happened to be the internal or the audit manager, was not big title compliance officer. He was an audit manager. And he said, I don't have the tools to perform these audits. I don't have these tools to be able to tell you whether the third-party vendors are qualified for what they need. Go outside of, I know I'm preaching, but it's very, very important. Get outside of IT, and you're going to find your vulnerabilities, your solutions, and your things are inadequate in almost 9 out of 10 companies.
We just had a question that came up that I think is very apropos for you, Roy. How can I protect my SMB's privacy and provide ID protection? Is there one platform I should use?
Ask that question again, Alan.
How can I protect my SMB's privacy and provide ID protection? Is there one platform I should use?
Are you saying SMB like small, medium business?
Correct.
So, yeah, there is. And I'll go slow. It's called the National Institute Standard for Technology. That's that. If it's there, it's available. It's growing. You got the SEC pushing itself towards that direction. The Department of Energy has another thing, and no, they don't just apply to utilities. There is a foundation out there of those entities that once you bring them together, then you have a way in which to evaluate companies, platforms, products that should and are capable of addressing the question that you're asking. How do we protect our identity? How do we protect this? There are rules, regulations, policies, compliance issues, all spelled out very clearly. And again, so that everybody gets a chance, NIST, NIST, National Institute for Standards for Technology. Department of Energy has a C2M2 type of things. And it's worth a little bit of research to go in and see the validity and the power of what those are, that you can then begin to build the foundation on that you're questioning right now, whether you're a 5-man SMB shop or whether you're a 500 person doing $5 billion, you need to start from that fundamental floor and then expand it out into your organization.
Now, we're starting to see that with attorneys, too. When they're asked to write the policy documents for a company, the first area we ask is, are their policy documents NIST aligned? And more are saying yes, because that's the standard they're reaching out for. So the platform, as you're specifying, is not necessarily a software platform, but it's really a platform of standards. And you should make sure that any kind of software platform adheres to the NIST or DOE standards. Have you been running across that, Adam?
You know, it's an interesting concept because, as I mentioned before, there's no federal universal guideline. There's nothing that anybody has come out and said is this is what you got to do. But the NIST and the C2M2 that you alluded to, those standards are excellent. Those are very high standards. The C2M2 that Roy mentioned comes from the Department of Energy, and I touched on this earlier. They were one of the first people to really take a look at this and really got frightened by the prospect of some kind of external actor gaining access to the power grid, the United States power grid. And they said, how can we develop a way that, we obviously we can't prevent it altogether, but what are the best practices? What are the best policies that we can enact to try to hold ourselves to the highest standard possible? And so I think when you look at the NIST framework is great, and the C2M2 framework, I think, either one of those or some type of combination of those are really, the gold standard that we have to go by right now, and that's certainly what I use.
We just got another question that came up and seems to be on everybody's mind because it came up last time. Ransom, cyber ransom. How do the insurance companies look upon cyber ransom?
Not favorably. No, no. They. I'll tell you what. The insurance carriers out there are writing coverage for cyber ransom, and it's an interesting discussion because it gets theoretical in nature, because insurance companies have been writing kidnap and ransom insurance for years, and it's a specialized type of insurance. And it's interesting because you look at the United States policy. You don't negotiate, you don't pay ransom. Is this a cyber terrorist? How do you classify it? And once you get over to the side of ransomware, as we saw with the big California hospital, Hollywood Presbyterian, had this ransomware, shut down all their computers, right? And they ended up paying $17,000, right? There's a couple ways to look at that, right? I think what some people are saying is, oh, well, they only paid $17,000. We'll run that risk, no problem. Okay. And then, which I don't agree with. That's just a point of view. But the other point of view with that is, how do you know when you paid them the $17,000 that they're actually out of your system? They didn't leave a back door, and 6 months later, they come back and say, oh, hey, by the way, we shut down your computers again, and this time it's $2 million, $3 million. Who cares? Make up your own number. The point is, they couldn't get into their systems. They didn't know what to do, and you shut down an entire hospital. People's lives are on the line. So you have to take a look at that. And I think the insurance industry and the insurance carriers are taking a pretty open approach to this. They are offering limits for cyber ransom. And once again, in terms of how much coverage you want to get or you think you need, that's a discussion you need to have with a broker. But the insurance carriers are offering coverage for it.
Alan, it's Roy, but okay, I'm good. The things that Adam keeps talking about, I'm going to step out on an edge and say, listen closely to everything that he said. We're going to limit this. We're going to do that. We're going to get this. One of the things that everybody that's listening in the audience should be aware of is the corporate veil, the board of director veil, has been punctured in the last 2 years 10 times more than it's ever been done before. And the insurance for board of directors is not holding validity. I meant the SEC is another group that says board members, you're going to be held liable. You're going to be the one out front, and you're going to find if anyone out there listening has people on boards, they're starting to think twice about staying on them or going on them because they are potentially the first attack point, because you have shareholders that are doing shareholder types of things and stuff in that area. So it's filtering up. And as Adam has said, once it gets at the top, somebody's got to determine how much do we pay, how much coverage do we get, what kind of packages are we buying. So again, I'll go back. It is a total corporate technology side, governance side, compliance part. And I don't care if you keep your head in the sand, sooner or later you're going to be brought out of it painfully. You have to begin to address the word of cybersecurity for what it is. It is a 2, 3, 4, 6-prong attack that can happen anywhere in your company, from the top all the way down to the innocent person that didn't know they left a USB drive or something in there somewhere. So take the whole discussion and the things that we've been pointing out and isolating it, and when you go away from here, realize you can do what most people would do. It's not my problem. I've got this all taken care of, or I'm too little, or we're not in an area that has any of those things. And sit down with your organization, sit down with your leaders and address this part. I would challenge everyone that's listening to this, just give me an anonymous answer. How many of you that are listening right now write in on your chat and say, I don't know if the board of directors is even aware of all the things we're trying to do. We don't talk to them. We don't know anything about it. I'm not aware if the C-level people, CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officers, marketing officers, it has to filter down so that the people within the corporation have a sense of comfort and can rely on their corporation that they are addressing something bigger than all of us put together. You have to do that.
Yeah. And Roy, I just want to touch on
question.
Hold on. Sorry, can I just touch on one thing?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, you brought up something great with the directors and officers. I just wanted to point out that the coverages that I'm talking about are cyber insurance coverages. The directors and officers policies that you were talking about, a lot of those policies, once again, are carving out that cyber. So that coverage isn't there on a lot of policies. So you have to be careful of that. I'm glad you brought that up, Roy.
A question from the audience, Roy. It seems as if you're talking about for-profit companies. I'm a member of the board of directors of a not-for-profit. Am I exposed?
I can give you a one-word answer on that one. Not only yes, but hell yes. So yeah, don't think you're immune. There are more people that are coming off of, quote, nonprofit boards. Used to be fun, okay? So if I used to sit on the American Heart Association, I've got to step back and look at what I am about to commit to for me personally, my family, and everything else. There is no, you can't just say, gee, I'm a nonprofit, and therefore, no, you can't hack me and you can't have cybersecurity problems. The answer, Alan, is yes.
And the second half of the question, Adam, can I get cyber insurance for a not-for-profit to protect our position on the board?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we write a tremendous number of nonprofits for my company, and you know, as Roy was saying, for-profit or not-for-profit, those exposures aren't going away. The exposures are still there, and they're different. They're different in the sense that, I guess the intentions of the organization behind them are different. One of them is for-profit, the other one's not-for-profit. But, those not-for-profits it's especially troubling because a lot of those people are donating their time and energy to doing good in the community and doing great things. And they're putting themselves in a position where they can be held personally liable if they don't have the proper coverage there. So you have to make sure that your D&O insurance and your cyber insurance line up, and there's no gap there where you could end up being on the hook for a tremendous loss.
Okay, we're at
This is
the. We're at
Well,
the 5 minutes.
one final question came in. I'm a member of a board, and I'm always told to go to the IT department. From what I'm learning from you, that's not the greatest answer in the world. Is that correct?
Well, it's not fair for the IT department that that's what 99 out of 100 people would say, and that's what they would expect, because IT has always presented firewall capabilities, the perimeter capabilities. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of the things that they have done to protect the electronic data, the use of all of that thing, PCI standards, HIPAA. But no, I mean, yeah, you should turn to IT, but support IT, and I'll hypothetically say, make sure IT is getting the people and the power and the dollars. Move it out of some of IT. Put it into the world of compliance officers and audit people officers that can go out and look at something totally different than whether we've got a firewall protection in place. So back to you, Patrick.
Yeah, we're at the 5. Well, actually, now it's a 4-minute mark. And at this point, I guess what I'd like to do is have everybody give a one last comment or statement, and we can wrap it up.
Let me start,
I'll go in alphabetical order if you want. I'll go first.
No, I want to, Adam, I'd like to start. Our first coffee hour was really, really straight down the cybersecurity line, more moving into it's more than IT security, it is compliance. You today have been a breath of fresh air to the people's backbone, which is how much can I afford in insurance, do I need it? I mean, in just our daily lives, somebody did something and didn't have insurance, didn't have automobile insurance. I am thankful that we got a chance to devote it. I'm sure Coffee Hour 3 will roll back to somewhere else. I gained a lot of knowledge from today, and I've been inside the cybersecurity and security world and IT world for a long time. So I learned a lot today, and that's what these are for. It's informal. It's meant to give people a chance to take notes, find out things that they need to go off and pursue, write back to any of us along those lines, and we will answer those kinds of questions. So a new area got covered today that I feel was not only beneficial to the people listening in the audience, but to those of us as panelists. Thank you.
Roy, I'd like to add just one comment. This is Alan. I'd like to hear from the audience as to what are the other subjects they'd like us to delve into in the coming weeks. We plan to run this on a weekly or biweekly basis, and we have the ability to bring in a lot of different experts in order to round out our coffee hour to really get to the bottom line of real cybersecurity solutions.
Adam?
Yeah, and I mean, I'd just like to thank, I'd like to thank everybody for having me. I mean, it was a pleasure being here and discussing this with everybody, because it's something that I really believe is a big issue today. And I mean, I think there's a lot of people with a lot of questions, understandably so, and it's complex. And I guess my final message would just be coming on the tail end of the last question you asked, Alan. Do you turn to the IT department? And you know what? I think the real takeaway I want anybody listening to have from this is that just IT or just insurance or just attorneys are not the answer. You need to really look at a solution that involves IT, insurance, and the legal field, the attorneys, to make sure that's the only way that you're really going to develop a holistic approach to cybersecurity. And that would be my one thing to take away from this. And thank you very much again for having me.
Excellent.
Thank you, Adam.
Well, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. And with those comments and statements, we'll bring this edition of the SMLR Coffee Hour to a wrap. And to thank you all for attending. We had a great turnout again, and had some great questions. And again, for anybody who didn't get their question answered, please feel free to email me at the address that you received already, or simply go and log on to the registration form and fill out the questionnaire. And with that, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful and enjoyable day. And as Roy says, make it one for those around you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.